Liz Truss has returned, and somehow she still thinks none of it was her fault.
What I've always been obsessed with is I want Britain to be a great nation again. And I'm depressed about how far we've sunk, the dire state our economy is in.
Remember the mini budget, the one that tanked the pound, sent mortgages through the roof, and made Britain the laughingstock of every international joke? Yeah, well, Truss is back. This time on Sky News podcast, claiming it was all a conspiracy. Again. She even said that she wasn't captain of the ship this time during her own premiership.
Yeah, and the
Bank of England is responsible for financial
Let
stability.
me just finish 1 second, if I may, Liz, because the biggest point on this as to whether the LDI was a cause or not for the size of the move that you triggered comes back to the point that you were captain of the ship. We'd had a decade and a half of very low rates, juiced further by an enormous amount of borrowing during the pandemic. And I would argue anyone involved in the markets knew that our finances were in a perilous state. So you have to gauge how much of a risk you take with them. And to say, the LDI problem wasn't my fault would be like the captain of the Titanic saying, it's not my fault that there are icebergs out there.
So this report says that 2/3 of the market movement was down to the issues with the LDIs. The Bank of England, the night before the mini budget, announced the sale of £40 billion worth of gilts. Another thing that can help trigger such a market move. The markets were already moving, interest rates were already rising, they were rising internationally. This tinderbox was going to be set on fire at some point.
So shouldn't you have been more careful? The Bank of England had a meeting the day before your mini budget. It was delayed because of the Queen's death. Unfortunate that it was only 24 hours beforehand. But they did make that announcement the day before. You could have readjusted your plans.
Last time I looked, it's the Prime Minister who is the democratically accountable person that runs the country, not the Bank of England.
Of course.
This is the Bank of England's role is to work with the government to ensure financial stability. And they weren't doing that. They were pursuing their own agenda. This is what, you said I was captain of the ship. The fact is I wasn't captain of the ship because I wasn't running monetary policy.
And today, politicians from across the spectrum, Labour, Lib Dems, even her own Tories, lined up to tell her exactly what they thought. Spoiler warning, it wasn't pretty.
What we have never seen in our lifetimes was a level of self-inflicted harm as a direct result of political choices made by the government, as Liz Truss inflicted with her mini budget. So we'll take no lectures from Liz Truss.
This mad conspiracy that there were people in institutions trying to tear her down when it was her own unfunded tax cuts in the mini budget that caused absolute economic chaos. It means that she's absolutely in denial, and those kind of remarks don't help that debate. They undermine.
Some of the Tories were also doing so. For instance, the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride, he was very vocal about the fact that he did not believe that Liz Truss and her ideas were going to be a good idea. He said they were going to be a disaster, and now he says, he was absolutely right, and he said that on air many times. So it's not just Labour who said that. It's convenient for James Cleverly to mention that. But you're right, Reform have also been reacting to this as well. A senior Reform source has told me, not content with wrecking the country for the past 14 years, the Tories still can't own up to their mistakes, and they are still looking to blame others. Once again, the Tories have no shame. They should be in hiding.
And this is why you're seeing such a pile-on. Every time Truss pops her head up, it's another migraine for the Conservatives. Instead of letting the disaster fade from memory, she keeps reminding everybody it was her mini-budget that detonated the economy. And this one was quite awkward. He did, admittedly, he tried to spin it, but still cleverly admits that the job is about taking responsibility, while Liz is out there insisting that she wasn't steering the ship.
Former Prime Minister Truss still doesn't take full responsibility for the fallout of the mini budget. She even said at one point she was not captain of the ship during that period and pointed to the Bank of England's control of monetary policy. Do you accept that? Or as a former cabinet member then, do you take responsibility for what happened?
Look, ultimately, when you're Prime Minister, you have to take responsibility for everything that happens on your watch, whether you are in direct control of it or not. That is the nature of our system.
You can almost hear the Tory comms team slamming their heads on the desk.
Now, a number of things that Liz said at the time that we had to we had to pull back on public spending. We had to be a lower tax, less regulated economy. I think those positions are increasingly being vindicated. And the real irony is that the people who were crying the loudest for Liz Truss to be removed from office are now in office, and the economic indicators that they were pointing at in their criticism of Liz are now worse. And it's not, as we saw under Liz Truss's premiership, a short-term spike because the markets were spooked by the pace of the announcements that she made in that mini-budget. This is a year-long trend in the wrong direction because the markets, because business, because consumers can see that Keir Starmer doesn't have a plan and Rachel Reeves is grossly out of her depth.
Vindicated? Really? I mean, if by vindicated you mean mortgages through the roof, pensions nearly collapsing, and the pound in freefall, then sure, James, okay, yeah, totally vindicated. Oh, while you're here, if you're enjoying this breakdown, please give the video a like, it really does help. But here's the thing that you should really be worried about. Cleverly still agrees with her. Every time Liz Truss opens her mouth to explain the mini-budget, she just reminds everyone how catastrophic it really was. It wasn't the markets, it wasn't conspiracy, it was her. And Britain, you, me, we're all still paying the price for it. And as for the Conservatives, well, yes, they did get rid of her, but her ideals, her plans, they're still very much alive in the party. He calls Truss's low-tax, low-regulation economics vindicated, which is just another way of saying Trussonomics never really died. The Tories might have kicked her out of Downing Street, but they're still clinging on to her economic fantasy. And if they ever get back into power, God forbid if they ever get back into power, don't be surprised if they try it all over again.
If the same people are still in charge of the Treasury, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the Bank of England, the Supreme Court, it doesn't matter. So I am very focused on how do we actually change Britain from the ground up. And I want political parties to adopt that.
I guess, do you think Nigel Farage is more likely to deliver that than Kemi Badenoch for the country?
Well, I think the way the Conservative Party is going, they're unlikely to win the election because they're not prepared to acknowledge what happened over the past 14 years and the failings to really take on what I would describe as the leftist establishment. So I don't think she's going to be Prime Minister at this stage.
And are you out of frontline politics for good, or would you want to be an MP again?
I never rule anything out. Why would I do that? Why would I?
As for Labour, well, the current question there is why are they still trying to outdo Farage? And have they finally gone too far with asylum? Which you can see in the video that's on screen now.